At Prince of Wales Fort in 1743, James Isham wrote that a 2-gallon bottle of water could freeze solid beside a burning stove. He also described ice 6 or 8 inches thick on the inside of walls. The fire produced heat, but parts of the post remained cold enough to freeze water. For the men inside, the stove created a narrow warm zone, not a uniformly warm building. Eastern Cree winter lodges recorded around James Bay organized the occupied space differently. The first material to watch was not the roof or the fire. It was beneath the people, pine boughs heaped around the sides where they sat and reclined. That floor layer solved only one direction of heat loss. The company post appeared to hold every advantage: thick walls, shutters, a permanent roof, and a large stove. But that stove heated more than the men beside it. Its output spread into walls, floors, stored goods, passages, and corners. Nearby air warmed first, while distant surfaces kept absorbing energy. If you trace the output beyond the nearest beds, the building presents far more cold material and interior volume than the occupied ring of a lodge. If you place a sleeper directly on frozen soil, heat begins moving from the warmer body into the colder ground. The soil does not warm like a small object. It connects the sleeper to a much larger cold mass that can continue accepting energy for hours. Pine boughs change that contact. Their branching structure lifts much of the body away from the soil. The uneven layer reduces direct contact and holds small pockets of relatively still air. You can follow the difference at the contact surface. Heat still escapes, but more slowly, so the person beside the fire loses less body heat into the frozen soil. The boughs do not create heat. They reduce one route by which the body loses it. With the sitting and sleeping places arranged around the sides, a person can remain near the central fire without continually sending as much body heat into the ground. The first circuit is now working. The body is separated from the soil, and the fire serves the occupied ring. Then the fire creates a second problem. Smoke rises toward the same roof sheltering everyone below. Heated gases become less dense and move toward the highest point of the frame. Skinner's descriptions of Eastern Cree winter lodges record a central fireplace beneath an uncovered opening at the apex. That opening gave rising smoke a direct route out of the lodge. As gases left above, replacement air had to enter lower down, most plausibly through the doorway and unavoidable gaps around the covering. If you trace the airflow, that lower inflow supplied the fire while the rising column helped draw smoke upward. The path was useful, but it carried some heated air out as well. From a sealed room perspective, the lodge appeared to be throwing warmth away. Warm air, however, was not the only useful heat. An open fire also sends radiant energy across the short distance between the flames and the people facing them. That energy can reach skin, clothing, and the bough layer before every wall or pocket of air becomes warm. The occupied ring could therefore remain useful even while hotter gases gathered above and escaped. The layout kept those distances short. The hearth stayed near the center. Pine boughs lined the sides. People sat or reclined around the source instead of occupying separate rooms. Short distance increased the value of radiation, while the bough layer reduced loss downward. You could receive heat from the fire without first raising the temperature of the entire enclosure. Wind and snow, however, could enter through the same opening that cleared the smoke. Skinner recorded that the apex opening was large in fine weather and could be covered with bark or canvas during storms. The source does not say how much of the opening remained or whether the fire was reduced when it was covered. What it does show is a practical conflict. When you compare the two demands, an operating fire needed a smoke path, while storm protection required less exposure at the roof. That conflict prevented the shelter from behaving like a sealed room. Lower air entered, the fire heated gases and smoke rose toward the apex. Weather altered the cover, while an operating fire still required a route above. The vertical relationship remained the same. Once you follow that path from floor to roof, the excavated interior becomes easier to read. In winter lodges Skinner observed at East Main River and abandoned camps along the east coast of James Bay, the interior was dug roughly 6 inches to a foot below the surrounding surface. Pine boughs were heaped around the sides for sitting and reclining, and the fireplace generally occupied the center. Excavation did not make frozen ground warm. It placed the occupied surface and hearth within a compact, sheltered volume, while the boughs kept bodies from resting directly on the soil. You can picture the cross-section. Entrance low at one side, hearth in the center, people on boughs around it, and smoke moving to the opening above. Each element has a position because each one handles a different movement of heat or air. You can test the geometry by removing one part at a time. Remove the boughs and the ground takes heat faster from the body. Move people farther from the fire and radiant transfer weakens with distance. Block the apex while the fire burns and smoke loses its intended exit. Enlarge the opening without regard to weather and exposure increases. The lodge did not eliminate cold, drafts, smoke, or fuel demand. It kept those problems from occupying the same place as the people. The open apex was not simply a thermal leak. It functioned as the control point that made the central fire usable. If this precise Eastern Cree engineering deserves attention, like the video, subscribe, and stay with Birch. The company post placed heat into a much larger thermal target. In Isham's account, the stove could be burning while water froze nearby and ice formed on interior walls. The stove was producing energy. The building was distributing that energy across more air, more material, and more distance than one source could keep uniformly warm. Cold surfaces mattered after the flames weakened. Walls, floors, furnishings, and stored goods that had remained cold continued absorbing heat from the room. A stove could make its immediate area tolerable, while distant surfaces stayed below freezing. When the fire declined, the post did not merely lose new heat. Its cold mass helped pull the interior back toward freezing conditions. People were also spread across the building's functions. A trading post needed sleeping areas, workspace, storage, and circulation. Beds and tasks could not all remain within the short radiant radius of one central fire. You can compare the two arrangements without pretending they serve the same purpose. Permanence and storage increased the post's heating burden. The surviving records do not form a controlled experiment from the same night. Isham wrote in the 18th century, while Skinner recorded Eastern Cree lodges around James Bay in the early 20th century, including forms and materials then described as older practice. Nor should one fort stand for every company post. The comparison is therefore between documented heat paths, not between two measured indoor temperatures. Within that limit, the mechanism is clear. The Eastern Cree lodge concentrated people around a central hearth, separated their bodies from the ground with pine boughs, and gave smoke a vertical exit. It did not have to make every surface equally warm. It had to maintain an occupied zone where people could sit, work, and rest close to the source. The post had different strengths. It protected trade goods, supported permanent operations, and enclosed more activities. Those strengths came with a larger volume and more cold material to heat. The lodge had its own limits: smoke management, exposure at the opening, dependence on fuel, and the need to remain close to the hearth. Neither structure suspended the laws of heat transfer. If you follow one unit of energy from the fire, its path separates the two arrangements. In the post, it could warm nearby air, then disappear into a cold wall, floor, object, or distant room. In the lodge, a larger share could reach a person by radiation before reaching the rest of the structure, while the bough layer slowed loss into the soil. You can see the useful difference without assuming a hotter flame. It was where the available heat went. The cold in Isham's account does not ease. Water still freezes near the stove, and ice still gathers on the walls after the fire weakens. In the James Bay Lodge described by Skinner, winter also remains outside the covering. The mechanism changes only the conditions within the small space occupied by people. That result belongs to Eastern Cree communities whose lodge forms and winter practices were fitted to local materials, movement, weather, and daily work. The record includes conical, dome-shaped, and larger two-fire lodges, so no single frame should stand for every Cree community. The arrangement examined here is the documented winter lodge with pine boughs around a central hearth and an opening above. A family settles onto the bough-covered sides. Someone tends the fire from the center. Smoke rises through the apex, while the edges of the lodge remain cooler than the occupied ring. Comfort is limited, maintained, and close to the people who need it.